Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. When Jesus looked up, he saw some wealthy people putting their offerings into the treasury, and he noticed a poor widow putting in 2 small coins. He said, "I tell you truly, this poor widow put in more than all the rest. For those others have all made offerings from their surplus wealth, but she, from her poverty, has offered her whole livelihood." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Now getting into the book of Daniel in the Old Testament. The book of Daniel is one of the most influential books in the history of Christianity, because in the days of Jesus, many people were familiar with this prophecy of Daniel. And as I mentioned before, one of the things that made Daniel so unique among the prophets is that he gave a timeline for when the Messiah would come. And he called the Messiah one like a son of man. And so that's why Jesus was calling himself the Son of Man all the time. It wasn't that he was trying to diminish his divinity, it's that he was calling himself the promised Messiah from the prophet Daniel. So Daniel was very well known among the Jews of the time of Jesus, and that's why it was so often quoted in the Gospels. But Daniel was also well known throughout the world, not just among Jews. And part of the reason why is because Daniel lived in Babylon. So these prophecies take place during the time of the Babylonian exile. And Daniel was one of the first people to be taken into exile to Babylon because he was recognized as a wise scholar, right? And so when he was placed in Babylon, he was made one of the Magi of King Nebuchadnezzar. The idea of the Magi from the story of King Herod and the birth of Jesus, right? They're coming from Babylon. They're coming from the east, and they were called Magi, right? Which means the wise ones. So Daniel, because of his miraculous stories, presumably in the lore of the Magi, they would have remembered Daniel. And they especially would have remembered the visions and the prophecies that Daniel spoke of. And so they would have spread this in the east, but it also would have spread in other places. The Emperor Nero, right, when he was the emperor of the Roman Empire, for example, he regularly sought out the advice and counsel of Magi from throughout the empire. As a matter of fact, because people were well aware of many of the prophecies of the Messiah, some people encouraged the Emperor Nero to set up the capital of the empire in Jerusalem, because they believed that the Messiah would come from the Jews. See, oftentimes when we read the Bible, we think of it as just like our own narrowly focused story, and we don't recognize the impact it had on the wider world. The Bible is not just a book of stories, it is a historical text. And the visions and prophecies that took place in the Old Testament, they had far-reaching hearers and a far-reaching audience throughout the world. It was not just the Jews who were familiar with this book of Daniel. Many other people, especially those people whom the Jews lived among. Remember, this is in the days of the exile, the Jews were basically dispersed throughout the Roman Empire. They weren't all just living in Israel. So these prophecies had an impact not just on the Jewish nation, but even on the wider world. So it's very exciting as we begin to read through this book, the prophet Daniel, this week.